6th of February. It's a Saturday night. Not as stressed as I was yesterday, Friday night. Just chilling out. So, fun weekend, playing with the kids and everything. So, we continue our world tour. We did an Indian yesterday, and today we are going to turn Japanese in the to paraphrase that song by somebody I can't remember did in the 80s, which was about something else a bit dodgy, and I never knew at the time because I was a kid and young and innocent. Something to do with masturbation, I think. But that's a digression and a half. Let's talk about whiskey, shall we? It's probably a better thing to be talking about. So tonight I am going to be sampling a Japanese whiskey called the Yamazaki. Now, Japanese whiskey, in terms of its place in the market and the history of whiskey, is actually very young. It was sort of in production internally in Japan in the sort of late 1800s, but at the turn of the century, essentially there were two guys that kind of really brought Japanese whiskey to the forefront. Now I'm going to have to look at my notes because I'm never going to remember what the names are. But the two guys basically are Masataka Taketsuru and Shinjiro Tori, the two guys that are basically responsible for bringing Japanese whiskey into where we are today. Now, Tori worked for a pharmaceutical company, but produced it was like a Portuguese wine equivalent that was very, very popular, but he was not too happy with kind of how he was making it and what he was making, and he really wanted to get into actually making whiskey and making Japanese whiskey for Japanese people. Now, Taketsuru was also very keen on whiskey and had actually gone on a trip to Scotland for a couple of years in 1918, and worked at Longhorn Distillery and basically found out all he could about distilling and whiskey and how it was produced and what it is about Scotch whiskey that makes it so good, and just kind of like getting in everything that he could, including a Scottish woman, because he came back to Japan with a Scottish wife. Now, he met up with Shinjiro Tori, and Taketsuru wanted to open a distillery in Hokkaido, which is on the northern island. Now, I'm going to put a map of Japan up now. Now, this shows the current distilleries as well, but you'll see that there is a distillery on the northern island. Now, that's where he wanted to put it originally, but Tori really wasn't particularly keen on the idea, and he ended up opening what was the first sort of mass-producing, full-on malt whiskey distillery in Yamazaki, which is just outside Kyoto, in 1923, and Taketsuru helped him for the first few years, kind of, get going and build everything up and get the whiskies going, and eventually he kind of broke away because he wanted to do his own thing, and he actually went back to Hokkaido on the northern island and opened what is now the Yoichi distillery. Now, Taketsuru and Tori then ended up kind of forming their own companies. So Tori was the founder of Suntory, which you've probably heard of, a massive whiskey company, and also other spirits as well. Whereas Taketsuru founded Nikka, which is, if you know Japanese whiskey, you pretty much know Suntory or Nikka. Now, they own a number of distilleries, but there are only 9 active distilleries in Japan at the moment. There are a couple of ones that have been mothballed. There's one called Karuizawa that, if you can find, will be really, really expensive because it closed down in 2000 or 2001, and basically the land was then sold, so it is definitely no more. Now, all the remaining stocks of Karuizawa were bought out by one company, I think in about 2014, so it's even harder to get hold of. You're talking hundreds of pounds a bottle. But at the moment there are just 9 distilleries working, so it's only been going about 100 years, just over, just under, because it's 1918 and we're only in 2016, but it's not been going very long. There's not many distilleries, but what the Japanese do is they experiment, they play around with it. Whereas with Scotch, it's a case of you have consistency, you have the same flavour over and over again. The Glenmorangie 10-year-old that you may have drunk 20 years ago will taste exactly the same as the Glenmorangie 10-year-old that you're buying today. Whereas with the Japanese, they're newer, they're new into the market, they don't have the history, they don't have that burden of history and tradition and making it taste the same. So they're perfectly willing to just experiment with peat and distillation techniques and aging, all sorts of crazy stuff. they have a sort of identity within the distilleries, but they're not afraid to really kind of just throw everything out and kind of go, do you know what, we're going to start again. So you might find that the Yamazaki 12 that I'm trying might taste different to the Yamazaki 12 that's out now, or this remains consistent, but there are other bottlings of Yamazaki that are unusual or different. Now, you could probably say that Yamazaki is similar to kind of a lowland space ID, whereas Yoichi and Nikka as a whole are a bit more experimental, whereas Suntory is safer. Even then, it's a very rough rule of thumb. So, Japanese whiskey is really highly regarded. It's also expensive. Sorry, that would be me jigger. Not just because of the distance it is to get it over there, and it's also really popular. So there's not that much of it that comes overseas because it's so popular in Japan itself. Just proving that I am opening it. But you're looking, if you can find this particular one as a 70cl bottle, you're looking at about 60 quid. Now, Yamazaki do what's called a distiller's reserve, which is the essentially an unaged version. But and you're looking at about 45 quid for that. But again, it's still not easy to come by. Just checking it is a 40%, just to confirm. Yeah, it's at a 40%. So that will go in here. But Japanese whiskey is really, really sought after. Also helped with Bill Murray's performance in Lost in Translation, where I'm sure it was Suntory he was working for. The reason he went over to Japan, his character, was to do an advert for Suntory. It may have even been Yamazaki, it might have just been Suntory as a whole. But demand in America in particular, and over in the UK for Suntory brands just shot up because it was such a popular film, good film as well. So what we're looking for is something different. It's Irish has got its own style. When I tried the English whiskey the other day, it was very, very good comparable to Isla's, but it needs to find its own identity. And Japanese whiskey have managed to find their own identity in terms of this extra level of kind of complexity and smoothness and delicacy. I think it's also kind of how people imagine Japanese people to be, and I'm not wanting to go down a race route or anything like that, but there is this kind of Japan takes care and dedication, and it's about the specifics, but there's also this delicacy, and from what you can read about Japanese whiskey. Now, I've had Japanese whiskey before, and it is partly true in that there is something about Japanese whiskey that separates itself from everything else. And it's this really unusual kind of, there's just a feel of class about it. There's time, there's thought put into it. It's not just churned out. So, lovely golden colour. I'm not sure if you're going to pick it up, but it's a really nice golden colour. There's a lovely, lovely sweetness to it, but it's also slightly floral. It's kind of like honeysuckle. Yeah, definite honeysuckle and honey, but that kind of like floral honeysuckle as well. Really, really nice on the nose. Oh, that's lovely. Really smooth, really rich. There's a very slight saltiness to it. A little bit like the Oban that I'd had previously, where there was that sea air feel. There is a slight saltiness to it and a very, very gentle pepperiness, but it's like a white pepper in that it's not overpowering, it's not Talisker, it's not Isla, but it's just a tiny little prickle that just supports all this sweetness at the background. It's not salted caramel, but it's that kind of feel in that you've got this lovely sweetness, you've got this lovely richness, this kind of sherried feel, but there's just this little prickle at the back of the throat of white pepper and sea salt just gently sprinkled over the top. This is excellent. This is really, really nice. It's a little bit of woodiness coming through now, but it's not too overpowering. Not like the Amrit I had yesterday where the woodiness just became too full on. This is just drying a little bit at the back of the throat, but it's in a pleasant way. It's not too full on. Really, really good stuff. Highly recommend this. If you can find it and you like your whiskies, it's worth giving it a go. You can't really go wrong with Japanese whiskey as a general rule of thumb, and that is a general rule of thumb because there's one or two ones that are a bit But generally, Japanese whiskey as a whole, if you can find it and you're willing to pay for it, are very, very good indeed. That's a very nice way to finish off a Saturday night. Now I'm going to take a little break, and I'm going to talk about something else for a special one-off. And then tomorrow, my world tour probably finishes because I don't really know where else I can go. We'll see anyway. I'll see you later.